Chicago, late October. The wind cut through the streets like glass, lifting brittle leaves that scraped across the sidewalks. At the corner of 79th Street and South Calumet Avenue stood an old brick school, its faded flag flapping weakly above the entrance. This was where the story of Jason Moore began. A 16-year-old black teenager whose dreams collided with reality every time he stepped outside his home. Jason grew up in a neighborhood where police patrols felt more like occupying forces than protectors. He was smart, well-read, and a top student with dreams of attending college. But in the eyes of some teachers, and especially the cops, he was just another kid from the projects. That October evening, Jason was walking home from the debate club, a notebook in his hand filled with a speech on systemic racism. Two police officers stood on the corner. One of them, Officer Randall, notorious in the neighborhood for his aggressive behavior. As Jason passed, Randall called out to him with no explanation. "Show me what's in your backpack," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Jason wanted to say no, but he knew how that could end. Silently, he unzipped his bag, revealing books and notebooks. Randall grabbed the notebook, flipped through it, and smirked at the title. "The America They Don't Want You to See." "A philosopher, huh?" he muttered, then tossed the notebook onto the ground. Something cracked inside Jason at that moment. Not fear. He was used to that. It was powerlessness. He picked up his notebook, stared Officer Randall in the eyes, and walked away without a word. He didn't know then that this encounter would spark a series of events that would change many lives. Because in the shadows of Chicago's streets, a force was rising, and that force was a voice that had gone unheard for far too long. Jason sat on the edge of his bed that night, the torn page from his notebook spread across his lap. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a need to do something. He had given speeches before, debated policies and reforms in safe academic settings, but this was different. He opened his laptop and logged into a live streaming site where student activists from around the country shared their voices. He titled his stream, "What They Don't Teach You in Civics Class." His voice was calm at first, but as he spoke, it grew stronger. "They tell you justice is blind, but it sees color just fine. They say everyone has rights, but I guess mine get checked at the curb when I pass a badge." He told the story of that evening, of Officer Randall, of the silence that followed, the stares from bystanders, and the weight that never left his shoulders. Within hours, the stream had hundreds of views. The next morning, thousands. His speech was shared, clipped, tweeted. Some called him brave. Others told him to keep his mouth shut. But among those listening was someone who mattered. Elena Brooks, a civil rights attorney and activist who'd grown up just a few blocks from Jason's school. She knew the system too well, and she saw something in Jason's words. Not just anger, but clarity. Purpose. She reached out. "You don't know me," her message read, "but I believe in what you're doing, and I think we can do more, together." Jason read the message twice before replying. He didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in a long time, he felt less alone. The first time Jason met Elena Brooks in person, it was in the back of a community center on 63rd Street. The room smelled of strong coffee and paper, flyers, pamphlets, legal briefs stacked high on a folding table. Elena stood near a whiteboard covered in notes about voter suppression, police accountability, and community organizing. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed and fast-talking, with braids pulled back and a voice that could quiet a room without raising an octave. Jason didn't say much at first. He wasn't used to adults treating him like he belonged in rooms like this. "Jason," Elena said, "your words hit like truth, and people can't ignore truth when it's spoken with purpose. We're organizing a town hall next week. I want you to speak." Jason blinked. "Me? I'm just a high school kid." "No," she replied. "You're a voice, and this city's full of ears that need to hear it." They spent the next days preparing. Jason learned about local laws, about qualified immunity, about how change doesn't come from shouting but from showing up, again and again. He met others like him, young, angry, hopeful. People whose lives were shaped by the same shadow systems. Over-policing, underfunded schools, red-lined blocks. At night, Jason still fought doubts. What difference could he really make? But every time his phone lit up with a new message. "Thank you for speaking. You said what I couldn't." The voice inside him grew steadier. By the time the town hall arrived, over 200 people had packed into the community center. Cameras rolled. Microphones were live. Jason stepped up to the podium, hands shaking but voice clear. They keep saying we need to stay quiet, that we make things worse by speaking up. But silence is how it's always been. And silence is how injustice survives. In that moment, the crowd didn't just hear a boy from the south side. They heard a leader. 2 days after the town hall, Jason's name was on every local news channel. Some praised him as a young leader. Others accused him of being anti-police, radical, even dangerous. The school called his mother, saying they'd received concerns about his political activity. Jason was pulled into the principal's office the next morning. Halverson, a gray-suited man with a plastic smile, folded his hands across his desk. "You're a bright student, Jason," he began. "But bringing politics into the school environment can be disruptive." Jason stared at him. "I was talking about my life. That's not politics. That's survival." Halverson's smile didn't waver. "We want to make sure all our students feel safe. Let's not add fuel to the fire." Jason left that office with fire already lit inside him. Later that week, Officer Randall reappeared. He parked his cruiser near Jason's bus stop every morning, sunglasses reflecting Jason's face as he stood silently by the door. No words, just presence, intimidation. Elena noticed it too. "This is what happens when you speak truth," she told Jason. "But you're not alone anymore. Let them try to push you down. We'll stand taller." So they pushed back. Together with a group of students, activists, and teachers, Jason helped organize a walkout. Peaceful, powerful. Hundreds of students stood up and marched through the neighborhood, chanting the words Jason had spoken. Silence is how injustice survives. The police didn't like it, neither did the city. But for the first time, Jason realized that fear wasn't just something you had to endure. It was something you could make your enemy feel too. And in that fear, the system began to crack. The protest had shaken the district. News helicopters hovered over the march. City officials scrambled to respond. Jason's name, face, and words were everywhere. And then, the threats started. At first, they came as anonymous messages. "You better stop before you get hurt." "Stay in your place, kid." Jason ignored them. But when someone spray-painted "liar" in red across his family's front door, his mother couldn't anymore. She wanted to pull him out of school, send him to stay with relatives in Detroit. "They know where we live, Jason," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't lose you." Jason looked at her. This woman who'd worked 2 jobs his whole life, who never let him see her cry. And now, fear had found its way even into her strength. Elena helped file a police report, but the officer who came by barely looked at the door. "Kids messing around," he said. "Nothing serious." Nothing serious. That night, Jason sat in his room, the red letters still burning in his mind. He thought about quitting, about deleting his account, stepping away, staying safe. But when he opened his inbox, a new message waited. "Your speech saved my brother's life. He was going to give up. Then he heard you." Jason stared at the screen, tears welling in his eyes. They wanted him silent because they were scared of what his voice could do. So he decided to make it louder. The next morning, Jason stood in front of the school again. Same sidewalk, same cold wind. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of students joined him. Teachers, too. Elena at his side. Even a few reporters. Jason raised his fist and spoke into the megaphone. "They can threaten us, lie about us, paint our walls in fear, but they don't get to write our story." And the crowd echoed his words. "They don't get to write our story." Inside City Hall, the atmosphere was different. The marble floors were polished, the voices quiet, a place where decisions happened behind closed doors. After the walkout and the media storm, the mayor's office could no longer ignore Jason Moore. But they weren't preparing change. They were preparing a strategy. "He's just a kid," said one councilman, flipping through Jason's speech. "But he's a dangerous one. Every news channel is calling him the next Malcolm X." The room fell silent, not because they disagreed, but because they feared it was true. So they came up with a plan. Invite Jason to a city panel on community relations. Put him on stage with police chiefs, city attorneys, adults in suits with polite smiles and cold hands. Not to listen, but to absorb the fire, then snuff it out with bureaucracy. Jason knew it was a trap, but Elena said something that stuck. "You want justice? Sometimes you have to walk into the lion's den. Just don't let them tame you." The night of the panel, the auditorium was packed. Cameras, reporters, officers in dress blues, and Jason, in his black hoodie and worn jeans, walked up to the microphone with the weight of thousands behind his voice. The moderator gave him 2 minutes. Jason gave them a storm. "You brought me here to make it look like you care. But I see your eyes when I speak. You're not listening. You're waiting for me to mess up. But I won't. Because I don't speak for permission. I speak for those who never got a mic." The room went quiet. And then, one by one, students in the audience stood. Then teachers. Then even a city employee in uniform. The mayor tried to speak, but his mic cut out. Jason's voice didn't. And somewhere backstage, a staffer whispered, "We lost control of the story." The night after the panel, Jason couldn't sleep. His phone buzzed every few seconds. Messages, mentions, news alerts. But one message stood out. It came from a burner account. No name, just a link. He hesitated, then clicked. It was body cam footage. The timestamp. The day he was stopped by Officer Randall. Jason stared at the screen, breath caught in his throat. "What's this? A manifesto?" Randall sneered on camera, flipping through Jason's notebook. "You think anyone cares about this crap?" Jason had forgotten the camera was even on. Most of the time, footage like this got lost. But this time, someone leaked it. And it was worse than he remembered. "You fit the profile," Randall said. "You act smart, but you're just another punk with a backpack." It was proof. Undeniable. Jason sent it to Elena. By morning, it was on every major news site. The backlash was immediate. Protesters flooded the streets. Schools held emergency assemblies. A petition demanding Randall's termination hit 100,000 signatures in a day. The mayor's office released a tight-lipped statement promising a full investigation. But something deeper had shifted. In neighborhoods across the city, students walked into classrooms with their heads higher. Teachers started asking questions they used to avoid. Even police officers, some, began to speak privately about change. Randall was suspended. But Jason knew this wasn't about one officer. It was about a system that let him exist. Jason returned to the community center that evening. Elena stood at the whiteboard, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You cracked the wall, Jay. Now we just keep pushing." Outside, people gathered in candlelight, not for protest, for hope. Spring came late to Chicago that year, but when it did, it brought something more than warm air. It brought change. Jason stood on the steps of Harold Washington Library, holding a microphone. In front of him stretched a sea of faces. Students, parents, teachers, neighbors, even some officers who had quietly joined the march. Not to speak, to listen. This wasn't just another protest. It was the launch of a movement, the Youth Voices Project, a citywide coalition advocating for equity in schools, police reform, and youth leadership councils. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was real. Jason didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a kid who'd lived it. You can break windows, you can silence mics, but you can't erase truth, not forever. They tried to make me feel small. They failed. Because I'm not alone. Thunderous applause broke out. Somewhere in the back, Jason's mom wiped a tear, standing next to Elena, who now worked with the city's Office of Civil Rights. Later that day, Jason walked through his neighborhood. The red paint was gone from his door. In its place, someone had written in black marker, "Your voice saved us." Kids waved at him as he passed. Teachers nodded. An old man gave him a fist bump. For the first time, Jason wasn't walking in fear. He was walking in legacy. Not everyone who needed to be held accountable had been. Not every system had changed. But the silence had cracked. And in that space, voices like his, like so many, finally had room to rise. In a city that once tried to mute him, Jason Moore had become an echo no one could ignore.